Hi there guys, it's Joey. So this is going to be another video in the Healing Witch series, and it's actually sort of a request as well. So I had a request that was about the goddess Morrigan and personal sovereignty, and I was thinking about it, and it actually coincides or ties into what I wanted to talk about in terms of the Healing Witch going forth and talking a little bit about different aspects and elements of healing, which I think is a really important subject to cover. As I've talked about in the other couple of Healing Witch videos, healing is often one of those practices that people decide is white and fluffy, and in Hollywood terms it gets called, like, you know, white witch type stuff and all those sorts of I don't know, movie terms which don't really apply to real life, and people seem to think that healing magic is easy and doesn't merit real discussion, and I don't think that's fair. I've said in my other videos that healing is really hard work. It can be really nasty. It can basically, you know, soul shatter you and make you force yourself to build yourself back up again. And as I was thinking about the personal sovereignty aspect of it, I was like, oh well, this fits into the next area that I really wanted to cover. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk probably at length and just sort of give sort of a generalized witch perspective on personal sovereignty and healing, and then I have a little bit more of a Morrigan-centric place too. So hopefully that covers both bases for people who are interested in hearing about Morrigan-based sovereignty and have requested it and who are following the path of the Morrigan, and for those who are here for healing work but aren't necessarily following the Morrigan, and that's not necessarily their cup of vodka rather than tea. So firstly, before I get into this, there are two people who have been talking a lot about personal sovereignty, and I have been taking on board those energies and those discussions, and I think they're really, really fascinating and really, really interesting. So Kelly Ann Maddox has been talking a little bit about sovereignty and shadow work and things of that nature, and then Joanna DeVoe has been talking about personal sovereignty a lot. It's her year of being the queen, and I wanted to really draw your attention to those two because these are incredible women, incredible witches that are talking and sharing, and there's these incredible resources that if you haven't already seen, which I'm sure you have, but it's little me going, look at these two amazing witches, and everyone else is like, we know, shut up. But I've completely sidetracked. There are white roses down there. It's a bit weird. Right, okay. When you've left white roses for yourself and you can't remember when you did it, and then you're talking about personal sovereignty, and there they are. Do. White roses, by the way, speak to me of personal sovereignty because of the red rose and the white rose in British history. Give you a minute, see who knows about red rose versus white rose. And they ended up being Tudor, because that's both white and red. War of the Roses. Okay. So that it ties into sovereignty in my mind. It's not completely sidetracked by white roses over there. It means something. So why personal sovereignty, and what has that got to do with healing? Well, as I said, the process of healing can be kind of depressing. It can be difficult. It can get you feeling down about yourself. You can kind of lose your personal sovereignty a little bit. When things are really difficult, other things start to impact, and that can affect your personal sovereignty, and that leaves you feeling like you're losing your sense of self, and you're losing your personal power and your ability to say, you know, this is me, this is who I am, I'm comfortable in this, and it's kind of like a little bit of yourself just sort of bleeds out of the page, and you seem to feel a bit whitewashed. And I don't mean, you know, the stuff about changing characters in movies and things. I'm talking about it starting to drain out and starting to fade a little bit, and like the colours running in the wash. Like, and it's a good analogy really, because when you're in a lot of pain, and you're in a particularly emotional pain we're talking about here, as I have mentioned, and as it's the third video I forgot to highlight that, but I suppose I should. We're really focusing on sort of emotional spiritual pain with this healing series rather than physical pain, although the two can interlink, of course. So it's a good analogy actually that your colours can run in the wash, because all that pain, all that heartache, and you're crying and you're getting emotional and getting stressed out, and then, you know, the colours kind of run and you kind of end up sort of with a faded version of yourself. And this isn't something that a lot of people talk about. And this pertains to everybody, I think, but particularly those of us who suffer with anxiety and or depression, because you know what that feels like, to not really feel much of anything, and you're kind of looking at yourself in the mirror like, who is that person? I'm not feeling connected to that person. I know who I am, but I'm not kind of present within myself. And it's kind of like your colours have run out a bit. And that is actually a loss of personal sovereignty. And I think it's worth pointing out here two things. One, what's this got to do with Morrigan energy, which I'll cover in a minute. But two, what really is a personal sovereignty? It's a sense of self. And I think the problem with a lot of social media and sort of glossing over spirituality that talks about personal sovereignty is that it kind of perpetuates the idea that it's okay to be mean to other people in the name of spiritual sovereignty. It's like, and I really don't like it. It really gets my goat. It really, that kind of encouraging other people to be mean to other people in order to justify your sense of self isn't anything to do with your personal sovereignty, and in fact it's kind of belittling yourself as well as at the same time trying to belittle other people. You know that meme or phrase or whatever, you know, you don't glow any brighter just by trying to dim other people. That's true. You know, and that kind of mentality gets put about in spiritual circles as sort of like this, I don't know if it's like this quick fix attitude towards personal sovereignty, like, oh well, if you don't vibe with this person, you don't owe them any explanation, you can just, you know, cut them out of your life and that's it, it's fine, everybody should do this. Now, I'm not saying that if you're not having serious problems with a particular group of people, or you know, you really don't gel with somebody and you're like fighting all the time, I'm not saying, you know, that you should absolutely not cut out things that are toxic to you. What I'm saying is, how did we go from like to that place, to that chopping board, to that quick place of how disposable people are? People are not freaking disposable. If you don't want to be treated like a disposable thing, then don't treat other people like they don't matter, because their personal sovereignty is just as important as your personal sovereignty is. And I think we don't tend to think outside our own bubble sometimes. I'm guilty of it. Like sometimes I say, do things and I'm like, oh god, that was probably unempathetic of me, and I have to learn my lessons too. And I think we really need to look at personal sovereignty in terms of what it actually is, and this kind of mean girl / boy attitude that it kind of gets perpetuated as. Because I'm the queen and you can all go F off is not personal sovereignty. It's just mean. And it's not good for you. You're healing your sense of self either. Because if you think, you know, oh, that sort of attitude is putting yourself on a pedestal above people. It's saying that you're better than people and that people aren't all the same and people don't all deserve love and respect. Obviously, there are going to be extreme examples of, you know, people that have committed great evils in their life, and I understand that, you know, that there are going to be those extremes, and the lighting is going to go all ominous because I've said that. And that's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about, regular folks, people on a spiritual path who are seeking their betterment, who are witches or spiritualists or whatever you may be, that are seeking to improve themselves, and then using that spirituality and looking at that spirituality in terms of healing and in terms of personal sovereignty. A good, healthy sense of self, a healthy balance of personal sovereignty is good for the healing process, and is, I would argue, necessary for the healing process. And I'll get into that a bit more in a sec. But I said I was going to mention why personal sovereignty in the Morrigan. So for those of you who don't know, and I imagine most who follow me and the Morrigan probably already do know, that the goddess Morrigan has a very regal, sovereign aspect to her. And this is to do with her role as goddess of the land. And in Celtic belief systems, it was believed that the land had a direct relationship to the health and well-being of its ruler. So if a ruler was sickly or had limbs missing, in the case of Nawada, and they weren't of good health, or weren't sound mind, then the land would physically suffer. So there was a physical relationship between the energy and welfare and well-being of the king or queen and the physical land. So, you know, crops would fail if the king was failing or queen was failing. And one of the roles of the Morrigan, which some argue is synonymous with the role of Morgana Le Fay in the Arthurian myths, and is actually based on some of her lore, is the replacing of kings who aren't doing their job properly, old, withered, whatever, with new, younger, virile, young men, young women, rulers. And so personal sovereignty and relationship to the land are tied into one being. And so the goddess Morrigan has this regality, this sovereignty, and rules over that aspect in one of her many guises and many forms. So if you don't know, that's why personal sovereignty comes into her mythos and the relationship that one has with the goddess Morrigan. So one of the questions that I was posed in the request video for the video was, you know, how I felt about the Morrigan seeing elements of how we've reacted and how we have overcome trials and situations. And I've talked about this before, so I'm not going to go over all ground too much, but I've talked about the fact that it is my personal belief that she is a silent watcher, and she watches everything we do when we get tried and we get tested. And in my Is the Morrigan Calling video, I believe, amongst others, I talk about the fact that I wholeheartedly believe she's been there my entire life, and when she really came forth, she brought up all these difficult points in my life, and how I had behaved and how I'd overcome, and how I was a survivor or a warrior, or however you feel best. And rather than give in to a victim mentality, rather than lie down and die, I came through that, you know, bleeding, clawing my way through at points, but I came through it. And I absolutely agree with this, and it's basically an evaluation of personal sovereignty, is what the tie-in there was, that she is evaluating how you behave and how you conduct yourself as well, because certain behaviours are perhaps dishonourable and unbecoming of one's personal sovereignty, as I've already alluded to with this idea of mean girl behaviour being suggested as personal sovereignty, and I just don't think it is. So that's how those things tie in. So how does all that tie into an idea of healing with personal sovereignty? We've talked about how personal sovereignty can be kind of battered and bruised by the healing process, or by the wounds and the scars that require the healing process, to be more succinct. And I think that's very, very true. And I can talk to my own personal experiences. So for me personally, my personal sense of sovereignty takes a beating, and still takes a beating, from the fact that I'm currently overweight. And this is something that I struggle with. And it's actually turning out that it might be based on a physical condition as well as an emotional condition. And this is all very, very tied in with a lot of the unpleasantness of growing up in a household where your worth was determined on a lot of things that shouldn't have been. But additionally, there was a huge, huge spotlight on your physical appearance, with the contradictory advice that when I did lose weight as a kid, that then the bullying by my mother got 100 times worse, and she got nastier and nastier as I actually had lost the weight. And there was an element of I don't know, jealousy that she hadn't lost the weight, I guess. So there was kind of the bullying and being called a fat and all the rest of it, while I was slightly chubby. I mean, looking back at it, I'm like, God, I wish I'd known I was just slightly chubby for a kid. I wasn't like obese or anything. I was slightly chubby, and I was always hourglass shaped. So naturally, I was naturally bustier than kids my age and stuff like that. So, you know, I wish one person had gone back and just told me, you know, it's fine, you just exercise a bit, you'll be fine. Too late now, but there you go. This is why you should never tell your kids they're fat. It does so much damage. So my personal sovereignty to this day takes a beating by the fact that, you know, I'm overweight now, and it's a struggle, and there are all sorts of these elements, and I have to heal on a level of personal sovereignty where I get to the point where I'm like, you know what, what's the best way of putting it? I deserve to be the best me that I can be in physical terms as well as all the rest. So I need to heal all this nonsense that gets garbled up every time I try and lose weight and I try and exercise, and when I get set back and I get emotional about it. And how emotional I get about the setbacks. And I need to address the healing there, because my personal sovereignty requires me to be the best version of me that I can be in all forms, in physical, in emotional, in mental, and spiritual. I have to take a good hard look at what I'm doing to myself. And there is a line here with healing and personal sovereignty, and one of the lines is learning about things such as, when do you not apologise for personal sovereignty versus when are you being an arsehole and you need to really take a look at what you're doing, because, you know, that's not actually personal sovereignty, that's personal arsery. Oh, I like it. Personal sovereignty versus personal arsery. Go. Anyway, and personal sovereignty is not apologising for who you are as a person, but you have to realise that the personal sovereignty can leak over into, I'm not going to apologise to who I am as a person, so then I kind of start enforcing that on other people. Like, you can't decide that you are the way you are and that's right, so that person isn't behaving the way you're behaving, so they're wrong. Because it's a lack of empathetic connection there between the fact that your personal sovereignty is yours, their personal sovereignty is theirs, and both can coexist. And there isn't a right, and there isn't a definite right either in personal sovereignty, because who you are today isn't necessarily, and probably very likely isn't, who you are going to be a year down the line, 5 years down the line, etc. Because the whole point of spirituality and healing and growth is that you keep changing, you keep striving, you keep seeking to be the best version of you, and you take a look at how you're behaving, what you're saying, and this, that, and the other, and taking it into yourself. It's like, right, what part of this is me being an arse, and what part of this is not fair only to me? What am I being unfair to myself? Am I preventing myself from healing? Am I, a lot of us talk to ourselves, and we would never dream of talking to another human being as badly as we talk to ourselves. We are so self-critical. And yes, this is a Virgo thing, and people have said, oh, it's a Virgo thing. And I'm like, I don't think it's just a Virgo thing, like these inner dialogues we have with ourselves that aren't healthy. Basically, when you're doing that, you're attacking your own personal sense of sovereignty. You're attacking who you are. And why are you doing that? It could be a multitude of reasons. It could be a conditioned response. It could be something you've learned from someone. It can be depression and anxiety and things that need an awareness in order to change the dialogue. You've got to be aware of how you're talking to yourself and how you are basically beating up your own crown with your fists and leaving yourself bloodied, bruised and crownless. And you're doing that to yourself, and that's not cool. It's not good in basic terms. You've got to be your own best friend sometimes, and you've got to stick up for yourself. But there's that line again with that personal sovereignty. You have to then be aware of when you are sticking up for yourself, when you are looking after yourself, versus when you are just completely disregarding the feelings of everybody around you, or particular individuals, in the name of spiritual sovereignty, which isn't healthy either. It's a difficult one. It's a very, very difficult one, and I think perhaps this is more true of people who are following the goddess Morrigan than many others. I'm not going to say all others because that's not fair. Again, that's me correcting myself, like, stop that. But the goddess Morrigan kind of really throws these trials at her followers, throws these difficult scenarios and situations, and it's kind of like learned by being thrown in at the deep end. Sink or swim, and many times she's not going to help, because this is your trial, this is your test, this is your obstacle. Overcome it. And she may well give you a little bit of encouragement from time to time with certain lessons, like you can do it, get up. But it's not coddling, and that's people who require coddling from their deities, spiritualities, they're not gonna, the Morrigan isn't gonna help, because you need coddling. And if you need coddling, it's a different realm of spirituality, to be honest. And many dark goddesses are this way inclined. I read a really wonderful article on Stephanie Woodfield's blog this week about, all about this sort of dark goddess energy and how it's more of a balance rather than it being all light and fluffy and all the rest of it. It was about karma and threefold law and things of that nature is what the actual article was about. Definitely worth checking out Stephanie Woodfield's blog as well. Again, preaching to the choir. Yeah. And those tests, those trials, those difficulties can make healing perhaps even more necessary and even more difficult, because it churns up a whole lot of differing emotions, all of which can drain your personal sovereignty, your sense of self-worth, who you are. But the great thing about personal sovereignty is that I think it's always repairable. And there are many, many ways of repairing your sense of self-worth. Some of them are obvious. So, like for my example with being overweight, getting back on track and getting back on being healthy and reading up new healthy recipes and exercising and praising yourself for each time you do this. So I've been praising myself over the last couple of days for each time I've engaged in certain exercises, and when I've had healthy foods and things. Praise of self is really helpful and healing towards one's personal sovereignty, because before you know it, you develop the healthier habit of changing your life, and you've done that and you've achieved that, and you can celebrate that, and that sort of heals your sense of personal sovereignty. It heals your sense of self. And it's healing as well the way in which you're talking to yourself. So when you're encouraging yourself rather than putting yourself down, I think that's a really key lesson for all of us. in how we talk to ourselves. We've got to learn not to be putting ourselves down and being hateful to ourselves. On the other hand, we've got to learn to, you know, not be putting ourselves above other people and making out we are the top shiz and no one else comes close. I don't know what that was. Madness, basically. And personal sovereignty on a buzz. Woo! That's what it was. So we've got to learn that balance there. And that process is healing, deeply, deeply healing. And it can also be really, really difficult because it can be insidious how you talk to yourself on a really nasty... You've got to watch for it. You've got to catch yourself doing it and say to yourself, that's not how we talk to ourselves anymore. That's not how we heal. That is not who we want to be. We don't want to be putting ourselves down and tearing ourselves open because life is difficult enough as it is. We've already been through all these awful situations. We need to be on our side to get through it. We need to heal it, and we need to walk through that path as hand in hand with ourselves, as weird as that sounds, because then we are whole. We're not at war with ourselves, you see. And it's interesting how a sense of personal sovereignty and a real sense of self is with a goddess such as the Morrigan, because she's a warrior goddess and she doesn't want you to be at war with yourself. Because what is the essence of a warrior? And the essence of a warrior is somebody who fights for something they believe in. And quite frequently, the ideal warrior in many cultures is somebody who doesn't brawl, isn't a brawler, doesn't fight for no reason, doesn't fight at every opportunity, doesn't seek out death and destruction. It's just that they have this high code of moral ethics and they protect and serve. I realise it's a police thing in America, but never mind. They protect and serve their families, their tribe, their loved ones, those who need defending. And this takes many, many forms in modern day. And one of the things that we need to protect is our own heart and soul. And it's okay to protect your own self. It is. It's not selfish. And it's okay to take that time away from everything and just look at how you're healing and how you're talking to yourself and your sense of self. And your sense of self-worth is basically your personal sovereignty, because you've got to believe that you're worth healing. I'm going to say it again. You've got to believe you are worth healing. You can get better, and you've got to believe you can. You've got to believe you deserve it. So I really wanted just to cover that and talk about that a little bit. I hope that's helpful. Any questions, pop them down below. And I have got other video requests. I have one other Morrigan video request about Ogum and so forth. I have not forgotten. They're on the list. I'm getting through everything. I haven't stopped since yesterday. We're going to get everything done. We're getting there. Don't know what this is. No idea. Anyway, so that was personal healing and sovereignty and the goddess Morrigan. Many blessings.